Hi, my name is Tamara. I'm a maritime archaeologist for the state of Wisconsin. I work for Wisconsin Historical Society, and I've been with the society for about 16 years. We know through historical research that there are about 750 vessel losses in Wisconsin state waters. Of those, we know of where about 190 are located. Our office looks at cataloging those resources, and we look at about 3 or 4 different shipwrecks a year depending on the funding that's available to us. We know that in Sheboygan and the surrounding counties there's about 125 historic losses. Of those, we know of where about 35 of those vessels are located, and actually most of them are listed on the National Register of Historic Places. We work with individuals in the area to locate a number of the shipwrecks. We have area wreck hunters like Steve Radovan, who's just found 2 new shipwrecks right off Sheboygan. And they report them to us, and then we seek funding in order to go and complete the archaeological survey. The individuals that find them are either wreck hunters, people that will look for shipwrecks recreationally, or just people that stumble across them, fishermen that have gotten their gear snagged in a particular feature on the bottom, which turns out to be a shipwreck. Or there's a woman from Two Rivers area named Susie Johnson. She's a retired bookkeeper, and she took up power parachuting in her retirement. She's discovered over the last 5 years 9 shipwrecks that have just washed out of the beach. So there's always opportunity to find a number of these shipwrecks. You don't have to be a diver or even a wreck hunter to just be able to see and locate them and report them to the state. So as we study more of these shipwrecks, we're able to determine how a particular individual has developed their skill for shipbuilding and how that's changed over time. And we're also able to look at various types of vessels and to see how they are similar and different between and amongst builders. When our office surveys ships, we do what's called phase 2 archaeology, which means leaving everything in place. We do no excavation. So what we do is we'll lay a central baseline down the center of the ship, and then it's divided into 10-foot sections. Then we assign people to the sections, and we do basically what you learn to do in kindergarten. We draw what we see within the 10-foot box. However, we add measurements to it and scale. And therefore, we're able to create an overall site plan, a drawing of what we see on the bottom. This is really important because in a lot of cases, especially with early wooden ship construction, they were made not by blueprint, not by drawings. They were made really because someone had done an apprenticeship, they learned the skill and trade, and then they started developing their own techniques for shipbuilding. In phase 2 archaeology, it's more than just drawing what we see on the bottom. In a lot of cases, we look at cataloging the artifacts that remain with the shipwreck. Sometimes these were personal items that were brought aboard the ship by the sailors and used in their day-to-day lives. But in a lot of cases, we can also get information from the cargo. They sometimes carried cargoes of general merchandise, and they would have been bringing this cargo to what were then frontier cities of the time. And so they're sort of like time capsules, these shipwrecks, in that they are very representative of a point in time when they went down. And they would have had everything that would have been used by the sailors. We have to understand that these shipwrecks were not necessarily just places where they lived and worked, but oftentimes they were places where they died. And so we need to be very respectful of them as final resting places for a number of the sailors that served aboard them. For divers, there are shipwrecks that really range from very shallow all the way down to the recreational range, 130 feet. Although there's still quite a few shipwrecks in this area that can be explored that are in the technical diving range down to about 300 feet of water. So there's all sorts of shipwrecks to visit for all ranges of divers. But the shipwrecks aren't just able to be visited by divers. There's also very shallow shipwrecks that can be seen from the deck of a boat, either a kayak or even a stand-up paddleboard, like the schooner Montgomery, which is right off the Whistling Straits golf course. That's in 20 feet of water, and it's really pretty shipwreck to just paddle right over. So although the shipwrecks are available and accessible for everyone, there are some laws that do protect the shipwrecks. In the state of Wisconsin, these are all considered property of the state, and that's not the nebulous state. They're the property of all of us as citizens of the state of Wisconsin. And in so, there are rules and laws that protect them from looting. So you cannot remove any item from shipwrecks. You cannot alter a shipwreck in any way, meaning disturb it or damage it, and you cannot move items around on the shipwreck itself. So all of that is protected under the laws of the state, and those that are listed on the National Register are also protected under a federal level of laws, and those which have human remains have the burial laws of the state affected. I have a number of favorite wrecks in the Sheboygan area. My very favorite is the Walter B. Allen. It was built in Ogdensburg, New York in 1866. And the surprising thing is it wasn't really lost here initially. It went up on the beach on South Manitou Island in the spring of 1880. And the owner, John Long out of Chicago, hired a tug and a pump and went up to salvage his vessel. It had been filled with corn that had come out of Chicago. He pumped it out, patched it up, and they took the vessel in tow and they towed it over to Manitowoc. And as they came into Manitowoc, they said they had no way of dispatching the wet grain. So they sent them on their way, and as they headed south on the lake, they came into a storm. The pump failed and it sank here off Sheboygan in about 160 feet of water. What's really interesting is that it sank very slowly. Normally when vessels sink quickly, all of the air expands and it blows the cabin off and it disrupts the structure. But because this sank so slowly, the deck is intact and the pump is still aboard. It's sitting on the deck on caster wheels, and there's a donkey boiler that's right behind it. And even the overboard discharge is still the tubing comes out of the hold and is positioned so that it goes over the deck. So it looks like it could, if you could fire the pump up, that it could be pumped out today. It used to be that really until the early 2000s, both masts were standing as well, and but over time they became structurally weak and fell over. I really think that the Walter B. Allen is just such a beautiful shipwreck. It almost looks like if Walt Disney were going to make a shipwreck and put it in a movie, that this would be a wreck that he would use. What's really interesting too is that it was a canal schooner, or what's called a canaler, and it's a very specific type of ship that was built for the Great Lakes. It was actually built to transit the Welland Canal. That's the canal that bypasses Niagara Falls. And in so, these canal locks were about 150 feet long, 26.6 feet wide. This particular ship was 140 feet long and 26 feet wide, so there were 3 inches to spare on either side of the vessel. And so anything that was hanging over, like the bowsprit and jib boom, which hung off the bow of the ship, or the cat heads, which are the little whiskers that are off the bow that hold the anchors, or even off the stern, there are davits that support a yawl or a workboat. They would all have capacity to be turned inbound. So the davits could be spun in and the workboat set on the deck. The cat heads could be folded up and the anchors rotated so that they didn't hang over and take up a lot of capacity within that lock box. because the more vessel you could fit in there, the more commodity you could fit through and the more money that you could produce with your ship. So I think that that's really interesting in that, that all of those features are visible and available on the Walter B. Allen, and you can really see how this was sort of a transformer of its day. Everything folded up and it fit right in that lockbox to be able to service the hungry eastern ports. These vessels that were involved with the canal trade really were, or canalers, the grain trade, were used to bring grain from the Midwest to the eastern ports, and then when they returned with coal that really fueled our factories and heated our houses here. So I can just imagine what that grain tasted like after it came out of a hold that was completely filled with coal. But it was a very unique and specific trade to the Great Lakes. Another one of my favorite shipwrecks is the Silver Lake. The Silver Lake was built in 1889 and it was lost in 1900 when it was run over, basically cut in half by the Pier Marquette ferry. So this was a railroad car ferry that was traveling at full speed in a dense fog, and it basically split the ship in two. And it caused the loss of one life. And the ship floated for a number of hours and eventually became lost in about 200 feet of water right off Sheboygan here. What's very interesting about the ship is that it's a scow schooner. So it was, there's an adage, if you could build a barn, you could build a scow. So they didn't require a whole lot of shipwright skills to be able to construct the vessel. It was square and boxy, very shallow draft, so it could get into unimproved harbors. And they were really sort of a handyman special of ships. But what's unique about the Silver Lake is that it had two centerboards. So the centerboards are sort of this dagger that could be raised and lowered in the center of the ship. And it prevented the ship from drifting sideways in a wind. But what's particularly interesting about the Silver Lake is that it had two centerboards. So the centerboards are sort of a dagger-like structure that's in the center of the ship that could be raised or lowered and would prevent the vessel from slipping sideways in a wind. So what's unique is that they were only allowed to be built on vessels for a particular time period. And then they fell out of favor, out of fad. But this is the only known double centerboard scow schooner that's ever been found on the Great Lakes. So it's a pretty unique vessel, and that's why we listed it on the National Register. What's also unique about the Silver Lake is that the foremast is still standing. So still standing upright, and it's rigged. So all of the lines that supported the mast are still there, and the cross tree remains standing on the mast as well. So if you get out in front of it and you look back at the ship, it really looks like a ghost ship, sort of there within the water before you. But my very favorite shipwreck in Sheboygan is the Lottie Cooper. The Lottie Cooper is the most accessible shipwreck we have in Wisconsin because it's up on shore and it's dry. Lottie Cooper was built in 1876 at the Randenberger Shipyard in Manitowoc, Wisconsin, and it was lost in a storm in 1894. They started taking on water. They came close to Sheboygan Harbor and signaled the life-saving service to come and rescue them, but they were unable to come out and get them, so they set anchor and decided to wait out the storm a bit. The next morning, the life-saving crew came out for them and were able to rescue 5 of the 6-man crew. The 6th built a makeshift raft to try to save himself, but unfortunately drowned in trying to make it ashore. But the Lottie Cooper is really accessible to anyone because it is here in a park. In 1992, during some harbor improvement projects in Sheboygan, the shipwreck was rediscovered. And instead of taking it to a landfill, the city of Sheboygan allowed it to be put in the park really as a living history museum. So you can walk through and you can really discover the scale of what a Great Lakes sailing ship would have been. So this ship would have been used in the lumber trade, and it was about 130 feet long and 27-foot beam. And it's set up to experience what it would be like to walk through the hull of a ship. You can walk on either side of the centerboard trunk. Various aspects of the machinery is here. We have the windlass, which is still set up, and portions of that, but it allows you to experience a shipwreck without even getting wet. So my very favorite shipwreck, the Lottie Cooper. So really, if you'd like to experience shipwrecks, Sheboygan is a really great place to come. There's shipwrecks that are very accessible, like the Lottie Cooper, to those that are very deep if you want to explore some technical diving capacity. So really, the maritime history of Wisconsin can be told through the shipwrecks that are here. There's a whole variety of shipwrecks through all different ages and aspects of maritime history to visit, and Sheboygan is your place to come.